Now, it's a pleasure to have Simon. Simon is someone, you should know that the Canada Council has been a beast that's been around for a long time. We all wonder sometimes how it works. We all wonder how we can make it even better. But Simon, first of all, he was the vice chair of the Canada Council from sort of a board perspective for, what, 10 years? So he got to know a little bit about it then, and then he's asked to run it. Now, that means he knows where all the skeletons are, all of the practices that have maybe developed over the years that might not be the most effective. So this is someone that can get in there and really make a difference. And what we're going to have this morning is just a conversation and talk about some of the key issues that are facing the Canada Council and therefore facing us. And I know one of them, to start off with, is the digital. You know, what is all this digital stuff the minister keeps talking about? What is it about the fund that's been set up? How do we access that fund? How do we have to contort ourselves to fit into the rules that there may be to get those funds? And I wonder, Simon, if you could just, you know, talk a bit about that.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah, it is now. Okay. The first thing in terms of digital, I think digital is a good way to illustrate more clearly what is the relationship between the Canada Council and Canadian heritage and, you know, the approach of the government. In digital, as you know, is a big issue for this government. You heard Mélanie Joly yesterday talking about it. And actually, 2 years ago, when I came to the council, one of the first things we did was trying to map out what has been done all over the world in terms of supporting the arts sector to transition, to adapt to digital. So I'm not talking here, because at the Canada Council, when I'm talking about digital, there are kind of three different things that we talk about. One is digital art. I won't talk about digital art this morning because that's an artistic practice, and that should be and will be supported in the context of supporting artistic practice. When we talk digital at the Canada Council, we're also talking in terms of our own issues at the Canada Council to become eventually a leader in digital. We're far from it. We are still, you know, some days I watch the Canada Council and it's like if I'm watching an episode of Mad Men, you know, it's like we're in an old bureaucracy, so we're rebuilding that. But the third stream when we talk digital is this idea that there is a need for the arts sector to access money in order to transition and to adapt to a change in society that is absolutely profound and that is changing the relationship of any citizen with any content, any symbolic content, any cultural content, any artistic experience, and this adaptation needs to be supported. And that's why we created that fund. So the first thing we did is we kind of decided to define clearly what is the sandbox of the Canada Council. Because when observing what has been done all over the world in terms of digital policies, what we discovered, or initiatives, what we discovered, no surprise, is that it has been done mostly to fix or to try to fix problems created by this digital disruption to cultural industries. So most of the government came with strategy that are addressing the future of their national cultural industries, that are addressing the knowledge economy, that are addressing the creative economy, but very, very few initiatives and very few serious policies have been crafted anywhere in the world in terms of the arts sector itself. Like if the arts sector would be, you know, we don't know, you know, because like if there's not enough economic potential in the arts sector itself. So what we decided to do at Canada Council is say, okay, let's do something, because we're the Canada Council, that really deals with the arts sector, and we will see eventually what our government, what our ministry, what Minister Joly will do with, you know, trying to address digital issues in society, and we will play some kind of a complementary role. but let's move now because there's an urgency for the art sector, and that urgency has not been addressed, anywhere in the world. So we are in new territories. We need to develop kind of a new approaches. So what we did after doing that mapping of what's the situation internationally, we did a very practical survey with the arts community. You may remember that it was a year and a half ago, and we asked all our clients to tell us what digital means for them in very concrete, practical, if not pragmatic terms. It was not a discussion about ideology and opinions about digital, but really trying to understand where is everybody in Canada in the art sector with digital. To discover, and that all those data are available on our website and in the form of open data, but to discover essentially that except for very few organizations who are at the forefront of digital, the vast majority of the arts sector is dealing with digital with a very big lack of knowledge, lack of expertise, lack of devoted resources, lack of strategy. So in fact, we as an arts sector are still evolving and working with the assumptions of the pre-digital world, and we're very analog in our governance, in the way we engage with public, in the way we program, in the way we collaborate or not collaborate, in the way we treat data. I mean, we are still very, very inadequately equipped to face a new world. So the Digital Fund of the Canada Council will be, we announced it for 4 years, because when we made our big submission, when the doubling of the Canada Council has been announced to Treasury Board, and I won't go into the secrets, we came with this idea that we needed at the Canada Council to have a permanent fund that would help the arts sector to transition to changes in society. The first incarnation of it is digital. Who knows, maybe 10 years from now it will be dealing with climate refugees in Canada. I don't know. I don't know what the future will be. But we said this need for adaptation and transition right now is digital, so let's address that. So we decided to invest, it will be 80 million or so. It will be money that is accessible to everybody, but it's only project money. And it's the one big exception for you organizations who are core funded in the new funding model. You have international and you have digital. So any organization that gets permanent funding cannot apply for project grants for creation, but you will be obviously invited to apply to project money in the digital fund. And that fund will have 3 components. One is around digital literacy. So any initiative to raise the level of understanding, technically, philosophically, ethically, I mean, understanding what is at stake for the future of arts professionals and arts organizations in the digital era. The second part of that fund will be really focusing on how to engage in new ways with citizens, clients, patrons in the digital world. So any solution that is technological or non-technological or no technological will be supported in that context. And the third part of the fund will be around the transformation, what I would call the emergence of digital governance in the arts sector. So trying to move from where we are now to a way of working that is more adapted to digital era. Obviously, and that will be, when all that will be released, and the details on that fund should be released for the summer, what we will try to favor are projects that are bringing approaches, solutions, innovative ways of working for the sector, for a part of the sector, for a region, for a network. We will less support one organization to have a competitive edge, you know, with the others, because we think the future is not competing more and more, but the future is collaborating, cooperating, working together. So we want to invite projects that are in fact encouraging collaboration, coalition, networking, working with organizations outside of the arts sector who have the knowledge and the expertise in digital, but with the idea that what we want at the end of those $80 million invested in the arts sector is that the arts sector will have more capacity for the future. We don't want to do what has been done in other countries where all the money has been spent outside of the arts sector with consultants and universities and all of that, and the arts sector became even more dependent of people outside of the sector. We want to reinforce the capacity and the agency of the arts sector for digital. So in a nutshell, this is what it is. You will read a lot about that because we realize that we are pioneers in Canada there in terms of the scope of what we invest. But I also learned, because I spoke with my colleagues, because Quebec is investing a lot in digital, Arts Council is. The biggest difficulty that my colleagues at the Arts Council in Quebec told me is that they don't have enough project. It's the biggest difficulty. They can't spend the money easily. So it has been very difficult because there's this entrenched behavior in the arts sector that we always try to come with a project that fits our own specific agenda, which is absolutely anti-digital. So the idea of trying to find ways to collaborate, to find ways to work together and go beyond, you know, the next season is something very difficult. It's not obvious. So this is why we decided to study more the situation. We organized this big summit in Montreal that has been a real success. We discovered and learned a lot there. We will reproduce that summit in many, many different regions in Canada to make sure that the discussion is really more about practical solutions and not a discussion on opinions or editorial perspective on digital. There's a lot of that if you want to attend conferences on that. It's all over the world. It's one of the most lucrative industry of the digital era is to talk about digital. We don't want to talk about it, we want to act. This is where we are. We have the money. We start to invest this year, and it will ramp up over the next 4 years. The last year, a digital fund, our digital projects supported by the Canada Council should represent more or less 30 million a year, which is a minimum amount when you consider that at that time, our level of investment, direct investment in the arts sector will be 310 million a year. So it will be less than 10%. So it's not to say that the Canada Council is shifting and, you know, everything will be digital. I mean, this is not at all what we're doing. We think it's significant investment, but it's reasonable and it's needed. I'm very curious to see what kind of projects we will have, but I hear more and more, you know, people talked a lot about that during the summit in Montreal. I think there's a lot of promising projects that are emerging right now, and I urge you to take advantage of it.
I see someone raise a hand coming up.
Can you talk about the new chapter program? There was a special fund that was awarded for the 150th anniversary. And I'm surprised to hear that there were not enough projects, because I think you were quite overwhelmed with the number of projects. So I think there is a vitality out there, but I'm curious to hear, you know, the numbers. How many projects you received? How many got funded? What is the overall lesson you learned from that?
Yeah, New Chapter was what I would call, it's kind of the last program of the Canada Council before entering into the new funding model. And the reason why we did New Chapter is very easy to understand. The government has been elected in October. There was a promise of doubling the budget of the Canada Council. In Ottawa, it was impossible to have any discussion about that until the Christmas party at the American Embassy. Because at the Christmas party at the American Embassy, I was attending, and at one point I saw that there was a movement in the embassy. So I just checked, that's who I am. And I saw that Justin Trudeau was coming. And he said loudly in front of everybody, Simon, tell the artists that we will deliver our promise. So we were allowed to talk about the doubling. So the budget came like 3 months after that. And the first question was, because we learned eventually that it would be a doubling over 4 years, first question was, can you spend $40 million, 3 months from now? And I was not ready to say no. So what we did is we worked very rapidly, night and days, to figure out a program. And that program was New Chapter. You will notice in the language that never ever we used the word for celebrating the 150th anniversary. And that is a deliberate choice. We're Canada Council, we don't want to tell anyone what to think about this anniversary. And so we talked about marking the anniversary, because there are different perspectives of what the 150th means, the Indigenous perspective, Quebec, a lot of people. So we invited the artistic community to come with projects, because it was impossible to invest that money in core funding within 3 months. That's impossible to do. With projects, and we asked, and we had that idea that we should invest significant money for those projects. So 50,000 to 250, 500,000. So significant money. And those projects should be projects that would be normally out of reach for artists, group of artists or organizations to mark that anniversary, to create an artistic legacy. That is not something that was in the planning anywhere in the government. It was a different approach. It was more around the celebration. We wanted to do that. And we called it New Chapter 2017 and beyond, knowing that some of those projects would take 2-3 years to really be ready, and that we could see that. My staff, a part of my staff, said, Simon, you won't get any projects for that. It's too soon, too fast, the artistic community is not ready, it's difficult to pour water on a soil that is too dry, and it won't work. We all changed our mind. We got 2,100 projects. That represents, in fact, in terms of the number of projects and in terms of the number of the amount of money, that represents 8.3 years of operation at the Canada Council. We got that within, 6 months. So we have been overwhelmed. And what is very interesting is that it has been for us a way to kind of attest some of the foundational ideas of the new funding model. For us, for the juries, for us, we kind of, we introduced new ways of working with juries in terms of ranking, pre-scoring, a lot of things that we will use in the future, and we needed to do pre-scoring in a situation like that, it's obvious. And we learned a lot, but what is interesting is that when you look at those projects, we supported 160, I guess, out of 2,100, so it's less than 8%, so it has been very competitive. What is really interesting is to see the nature of those projects. And yes, there are projects that are digital first. There are a lot of projects dealing with Indigenous conciliation, reconciliation, condolence, or ignition. A lot of a higher level of diversity in terms of our projects than ever before at the Canada Council. So I interpret all that as a resounding, powerful, and convincing answer that came directly from the artists and the artistic community of this country for more arts and also a way of supporting the strategic direction that the Canada Council has articulated. So we spent $34 million or so directly in grants, And I'm sure we will see, that many of those projects will last for a long time, and people will say years from now, during 2017 we did something great, and so. Yeah.
Great. Okay, anything else? Well, yes?
Can
Sarah?
I just add something? That 8% success rate is not enough, because if you think of the manpower, the time that people have invested, the emotions and the energy and the imagination they have put in this, in writing applications. Because what was great about this program is that we were not in the sort of 30, 40, 50,000 bracket that you usually can get for a project, but you can think bigger. And this is why people got excited. But if you think the person hour that was put into that, for the success rate of 8%, is really discouraging for the community. So I don't know. People who did not get accepted received a letter saying they could apply again, come back. But the scope of the programs will never be like that. So it's kind of a problem, I find.
Yeah, there's two things there. First of all, in terms of the rate of success, it's not surprising. Even at the level of PCH with other types of projects, it was less than 10%. Canada Council, in terms of our usual rate of success, sometimes is very low. If you look at projects and visual arts, it's quite low. So that was not exceptional. What I think, two things. First of all, I think that some of those projects will come back to the Canada Council, because one of the very interesting feature of many of those projects is that they were presented not by one organization, by many different organizations. So a lot of coalition and networks, and some of them will come back. They will come back to the Digital Fund, they will come back to the regular Creation Fund. And obviously the Canada Council is investing more money on projects in the future, so the level of funding for projects will be higher than what it used to be. So I don't think there's anything wasted there. I think that some of the projects won't survive, but I know because I spoke with many artists and organizations, I know and I heard of projects that I would be absolutely surprised if in my lifetime I would not see them coming back to the council and being supported by us and by other arts councils. So I don't think there's anything wasted there, and I think it's the nature of a competitive process. It's the same for public competition in architecture and all of that. My view is that the fact that we open the gate for that kind of a think bold was needed, really needed. And I have a big argument, because that's one thing I want to tell you. When I came to the council, I've been trained as a lawyer, so I'm always trying to see what's my case. And when I asked at the council, when I came 2.5 years ago, I said, how much money do we need? How many people do we turn down? What is the need outside? And I discovered and I knew that, but I thought maybe as a board member they did not explain that to me. Maybe as a CEO it's a different story. But I discovered that the Canada Council has no idea of that. With the new portal we created, we will know immediately, who has been turned down, how many people, are practicing, I don't know, something new somewhere in Canada, how many projects, because what we have at the Canada Council, we know the people we fund. We don't know the people we don't fund. So being able to say, okay, we need so much for the future, and so much will go to new applicants and all of that, we had no way to figure this out. I think that new chapter for us is a huge, huge argument when we will go back to Treasury Board, when we'll go back to government, in terms of the capacity, the real capacity that we have in Canada to create at a higher level. We needed that proof. We did not have it before, so we'll use it.
Great.
Sarah?
Yeah, hi. So congratulations on this initiative. And I just had a couple of comments and maybe questions. So you mentioned, Simone, that you wanted to make sure that there wasn't a continuing dependency on, external organizations and universities, and that the model needed to be one of knowledge transfer. And I think there are really good models in the university sector. Actually, I'm seeing my colleague Ross Paul, who led a number of universities for many years, where you can actually plan and quantify, collect data on the ways that the knowledge is moving, into the sector. And I think networks are a great model for that. So my first question really is, how would you like organizations to frame that process of knowledge transfer? And then I had a second question, which is, in the tier that's really looking at engagement with citizens and clients and patrons, there's a lot of activity on the ground, what I would describe as actually more with small organizations and community arts that are already heavily engaged with using these technologies. I think about Indigenous communities and Indigenous arts, maybe more so than large organizations. So is there a space for that kind of activity, which is really about pulling creative practice out of communities using digital media? So there are two questions, sorry.
Okay, so on those two questions, what I want to say is that, we don't want to prescribe, what is the ideal model, because I think it would be foolish. We don't know. But it's clear that in the principles of the fund, you will realize that we want to make sure that if we do get a project, that the leadership, the driving force of the project are artistic organizations or artists. So yes, they can partner with universities, they can partner with Microsoft if they want, they can partner with anybody, but the leadership and the ownership of the project has to come from the artistic community. Because again, we don't want to invest all that money and at the end of it not being able to sustain that. So there's a really kind of a parti pris for sustained development that is embedded in the criteria of that program. On the second question, yes, I think that there will be projects at different scales. When I was in the summit in Montreal, there were a lot of pictures on that on Facebook, so it's not private. I had many conversations with the Indigenous caucus that was created during that summit. And obviously I can see that they know what they want, and they will come with their projects. So there will be different scale of project. It's normal. We think, and I may be proven wrong, we think that in the first 1 or 2 years we may have a lot of projects around, literacy and all of that. We think that the second component on public engagement will start probably slowly and at a certain level. And the third one will be more, may take a little bit more years. But again, I don't know. And we are the first country in the world inviting at that level the artistic community to come with, innovative solution. So let's see what happens, and hopefully we'll be pleasantly surprised, and maybe we will have a better argument to even invest more there if it works.
Okay, I think now we're going to move to a different area. I'm on? Right. And that would be the international area. We know that many embassies now have added a cultural attaché, but a cultural attaché as a trade cultural attaché. I wonder if you could talk about your view of international impact and where the Canada Council fits in and where it'll be heritage.
Okay, so again, I think it's that question again, and yesterday I was watching on streaming Mélanie Joly. Again, what we try to do is it's always the same question we're asking ourselves. What is it that the Canada Council has to do anywhere that no one else will do if we don't do it? So on international, again, we know that, we have in Canada the perspective of Canadian heritage, of global affairs, global affairs obviously being absolutely interested and concerned, and rightly so, by a lot of geopolitical consideration. You heard our minister at Canadian Heritage who has a very ambitious agenda that is mainly around cultural exports. So us at the Canada Council, what do we do in that portrait? And our view is obviously we want to make sure that we do support any platform and any organizations and we want to have the arts more present on the international stage. One, it is important for the future of the arts sector itself. And secondly, it's really important because in many instances in the world, it's not ready for cultural export yet. In many instances in the world, geopolitical considerations are so complex that the only tiny possibility of exchanging with people there is through the arts. It's not through trying to sell, I don't know, video games and things like that. It's through the arts. So where we are now is, we heard, and I've been around for long enough. I read and wrote a lot about cultural diplomacy and all of that. Where we are now at the Canada Council, we don't want to use so much the term cultural diplomacy, but really think about what is the role of the arts in public diplomacy. So what is the halo effect of the arts? So we at the Canada Council are doing two things. We support the artists and we respond to organizations who want to be on the international stage. And the only criteria we are using to say yes or no is related to the excellence and the possible impact of their work on a region of the globe. Once that decision is made, there's also other possibilities because it's possible to support that and to give more visibility and to give more presence and more impact from a diplomacy perspective and sometimes from an economic perspective. So 3 weeks or a month ago, for the first time ever, I invited at the Canada Council, we had a meeting at the Canada Council with the Deputy Minister of Canadian Heritage, Jim Fleck, that you know, and the Deputy Minister of Global Affairs. And I was there with all our staff, and for the first time we had a discussion about how can we build a better intelligence of what's going on the world stage right now, and see when, if, there are moments where our mutual interests coincide. They don't always coincide. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's possible to have something that is absolutely a high level of integrity from an artistic perspective, a high impact from a public diplomacy perspective, and that thing could also open doors in terms of cultural, export. And when it happens, why don't we benefit from it? I was in Washington 2 weeks ago. We inaugurated an exhibition, a small exhibition called Punctured Landscape, that has been produced by the Canada Council with our art bank. It's a very challenging exhibition. It's a difficult moment of Canadian history around murders of Indigenous women, residential schools, abuse, sexual abuse in hockey. It's a very controversial exhibition, very interesting. And it has been presented 5 minutes from the Capitol at the Organization of the Americas. It was for the artists there, fantastic. They had a lot of people. For our ambassador, it was extraordinary because Canada was not lecturing anyone about, human rights. We were talking about our own issues and talking with other countries. And during that same trip, I spent, a morning meeting all the staff of the National Endowment for the Arts, discussing, how we can collaborate. And so for me, when we have moments like that, same thing in Venice last week, when we can have all those different configurations, the better. So Canada Council will double its investment. We have been doubling our investment over the last 5 years on international. We will double them again over the next 5 years. Not only with this idea of arts and public diplomacy, but also taking into account that it can play and it could be really good. And we are introducing new features in terms of international co-production, things that we never did before. And again, on international, I'm very curious to see what will be the level of demand, because, it's something we don't know. Canada Council, we don't know. If someone asked me, is 20 million enough for the arts to be present on the international stage, or do we need 50 million? It's a guess. So we think that let's start by doubling the investment, and we'll see where we go.
Then let's move on to the area of funding organizations and comments that relate. Very good.
Thank you.
To diversity and to
So-
indigenous. And
Someone this morning I was hunting for an espresso coffee in town.
They're closed.
Only Starbucks was open, but I ran into someone saying that I don't want to say, and I don't want to reveal anything about our in-camera session of CEO. And I said, yeah, so people are anxious. And I said, this is not a secret. I know that. I am anxious too. The only thing I want to say is that it's really important to realize that we and you in this room, it's the only place in the world right now, the only place in the world where a government decided to reinvest massively in the arts. Nowhere else it happens. And the way we approach that at the Canada Council is that nobody will lose anything. So the only anxiety that you should entertain, and it's a good anxiety, is how much more you will be able to get from the new funding model. Not how much less, and will I lose anything? We reimagine the Canada Council with the notion that we know what the baseline is. I don't believe in development by subtraction. So we know what the baseline is. And then, over the next 4 years, we will have more money to invest. So I think, the anxiety of will we perform well, and because it's a competitive process, is a normal one. It's a normal anxiety, but you should not be anxious of losing things, because this is not where we are going. So just to say that when probably a lot of you in the rooms already did the maths, but when you saw the investment of the council, you realize that the council is investing in new territories. Obviously, with digital, that's obvious. We are also over-investing for very good historical reason in support for Indigenous arts by tripling the investment there. We are trying to move the needle in terms of where the money goes, because when I came to the council, 72% of the money was spent the first day of the year to operating grants, and there was not enough room for project grants. So what we are doing now is we are putting more money into project grants, but at the end of the 5 years, it will only shift from 72% to 60%. So in the context of a big race. So it will be 60-40 and not 72-40. So we're not at all abandoning core funded organizations. We also made the decision and I announced that in many speeches, that our parti pris right now is not to add many new core funded organizations, because we already have more than 3,200 core funded organizations in this small country like Canada. So we think that the future is not to take that direction. We think that many organizations are not at the scale that they could survive. So probably in the next future years, we will see mergers, we will see regroups and all of that the Canada Council was not supporting in the past, because you had to choose, you go to literature or visual arts, not the two. So we think that there will be a better scales in the near future. And so where we are is that at this moment is that we decided where the investments are going, and you in this room are in a very privileged situation, because most of you are part of the component of the new funding model, where there's a minimum level of investment, and and we all know that there won't be new organizations in that portion of the new funding model. Nobody will create tomorrow morning a 3 symphony just to access money at the Canada Council. So it's kind of a closed world. So the investment that will be done in that component is a significant one. How it will be distributed will be absolutely according to the performance of each organization, their capacity, their willingness, their imagination, their innovation to meet the criteria of the program first and foremost, and obviously the strategic directions that the Canada Council announced around diversity, youth, Indigenous, and all of that, public engagement. I mean, those criteria are quite clear. So you will apply, and we will go through an historic moment of reassessing all the core funded organizations of this country in different categories. So the big one and the medium one, and the one that are organized around artists, because we think that scale is an argument when you try to address those issues of the future. So,
well, we've covered a fair bit of territory, but if there are particular issues that someone would like to raise now, here's your opportunity. Go ahead.
Bonjour, Simon. It's about a vision of the arts in Canada. There are over 200 organizations in the country doing exclusively community-engaged art practice. In the new portal, community-engaged art does not appear as a field of practice. With the elimination of the ACCP fund, artists who are working in this field cannot self-identify. They have to identify through circus or through music or theater. I would like to make a plea for the opening of dialogue around the possibility of adding legitimizing the field of community arts practice within those fields within which every organization and individual has to first self-identify as the first step in applying for a grant. There is huge concern across a very large community in this country about our disappearance at the Canada Council. We find the word community engaged once on the whole website. And so this is a plea from a consortium of organizations across the country who are very, very concerned about this move.
thank you. I heard that plea. Where we are now, as my colleagues and myself repeated over and over, where we are now is that we needed, when I came to the council and we were contemplating the possibility of making the arguments with, at that time, party oppositions, it was the election campaign, we kind of needed to say, okay, what is the state of the Canada Council at this very moment? Can we take that baseline and then open a new world where the Canada Council will be less prescriptive, less granular in its way of addressing any artistic practice? Because yes, there is engaged arts communities, practitioners, there are many, many, many other fields of practices where people would like the Canada Council to come and define exactly what it should be. And there's a lot of discussions about what is socially engaged and not socially engaged and all of that. So what we decided to do is to open the portal and take where we were at that moment in terms of our different categories and open, because artists can identify what they do, even if they're, and actually right now, what I can see, because we have more than 7,000 people who applied on the portal, 17,000, I guess. Anyway, what we can see is that a lot of artists are describing their artistic practice in a way that that was never captured by the Canada Council before. And it's true with, it's true, for instance, digital art. You have a lot of people who are describing their practice. And obviously, we will, Canada Council, take a look at it at it and see where it goes. But in a different perspective than before. Because before, what we were doing is we were crafting a program for each new practice or sub-practice, and sometimes when there were kind of a new trend, we would coalesce different practice with interarts. And so in the past, what we were doing is there was no separation between the criteria of eligibility and what is supported by the Canada Council. Now what we did is we made a distinction between the two. So the portal, in fact, is managing your eligibility, and the programs are managing what we support. So if someone says, okay, I'm a socially engaged artist, and I'm applying to creation or research or international, he will be, or she will be, or the organization will be evaluated by its peers according to that program. We can disagree on that approach. We will see, without being disagreeable, to quote Obama, because on that point, I just want to say that one thing I learned with that discussion with socially engaged art was that sometimes we need to be more mature the way we organize the conversations. I got many, I don't know how many letters that have been sent to MPs, to my minister, to the deputy minister, to force the Canada Council to make a different decision. And I was very happy to see that constantly, in a consistent way, the government said it's an arm's length relationship. It's the Canada Council to make its own decision and talk with the Canada Council. Same thing when I get letters from university professors in the US lecturing me on how to run the arts in Canada when they have their own issues. This is not a good way of advancing the conversation. So right now, there's a discussion on socially engaged art. There's a discussion, very public now, on supporting actors who are screen actors, so cinema, not theater. There's another one around comedians. There are many, many of those conversations. What we are telling everybody is let's make a leap of faith, register at the Canada Council. We'll support it, everybody we already supported, including socially engaged artists and artistic organizations. And a year from now, or 2 years from now, we will have a big discussion, public discussion, on every fields of practice that are not supported at the level they should be supported. Because we will know that. Right now, we don't know that, but we will know that. So this is how we are addressing it. It's very pragmatic. We're not judging if a practice is, higher or lower than another one. And for sure, there's no intention at the Canada Council not to support artists and artistic organizations who have been supported by the Canada Council in the past doing socially engaged work.
Good morning. It's such an exciting time, I think, at the Canada Council. You have so much to be proud of. It's amazing all the things that you're doing all at the same time, seemingly. I just had a quick question. I'm wondering what you think about the idea of making the content of funding applications public domain. The content of the application. So, I mean, Luc Colchen was mentioning a moment ago about how all this work goes into applications. And I think with New Chapter, it was this incredible moment of thousands of artists and organizations across the country thinking big, really big. And all of that work, all of those hours, all of that reflection, all of that collaboration that went into generating those ideas and those concepts, some of it, the Canadian society will benefit from because the projects will exist. But there are all these ideas that will remain sort of on the drawing board for a certain number of years. Perhaps they will eventually be produced. But in the meantime, there's such a wealth of information and thinking. And I think the Digital Fund will be the same thing. There will be all of this work of people sort of, it'll be this distributed workshop across the country of people dreaming things up. And I feel like sharing would multiply the force of that. I know that there are, privacy concerns and legal concerns, and perhaps not everyone will be willing to make their intellectual property public in that way. But in the case that people are interested in participating in that way, what do you think about that possibility?
It's an excellent question. Actually, you probably know that, there are artists and artistic organizations who published their application for New Chapter. And I think it's very wise, very, very wise. And because it's a way to attract not only attention, but other partners and eventually resources to do your work. So I think it's, and on the digital fund, you will see in the criteria that, and that is very clear with us, it needs to be open. So the digital fund, any projects, it's not about, I want it for myself. It's about, projects that are scalable, that are open, that are, shareable, and all of that. So that's the very essence of that fund, which is a new approach for the arts sector, because as you know, we're very good at hiding and competing. And as I used to say, it's fascinating to think that right now in Canada, I won't mention names, a lot of organizations still have a lot of difficulty to share their lists of subscribers, when we know that in Silicon Valley, they have precise information of cultural tastes of 3 billion people in this world. So they know exactly what your neighbor likes, and we don't build those bridges at our community level. So yes, I think the question of being open, transparent, share information, open platforms, I think it's the future. The Canada Council cannot unilaterally, ça c'est difficile à dire en anglais, unilaterally decide to do it, but I think every time, organizations decide to do it, and I hope that with the digital fund, what we want to do is we want to have the best practices. And even with New Chapter, we are asking some organization to showcase their work, to give ideas. And I think that, again, I want to repeat that, in not every project, but in the New Chapter Récolte, there's a lot of very promising projects, and I'm sure that they will be recycled in the context of core funding or in the context of, because organizations and artists needed to think beyond their daily restrictions. And this is where we want to go with the doubling of the Canada Council. Because the doubling of this budget is very exciting, it's very stressing, because we won't have the argument 3 years from now that we did not have enough money to make a difference. So we need to make a difference, and doing more of the same, a little bit more of the same, is not a good plan.
Well, at this stage, I'm going to bring this meeting to a close. I do just want to reflect on the fact that I personally think we're so fortunate to have someone that obviously cares so passionately and is using his intellect and the intellect of the people at the Canada Council to try and improve the process, make it a better process. There will always be winners and losers, so no way you can make everybody happy, but the fact that it's getting so much thought to try and come up with a system that's an improvement on the previous system and that is very thoughtful, I think we're very fortunate. And Simon, thank you so much for taking on this responsibility.
Thank you, and really I look forward to see what the results will be of the assessment.
Okay.